This episode is brought to you by Mortgage Workflow Partners and the Mastering Encompass series, both for users as well as administrators. You can find out all the information about it over at masterengencompass.com. Also, if you'd like to check out what we're doing on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe to the channel using the @MasteringEncompass handle. And make sure you stay up to date on all the information, not just with podcasts, but also video content that we bring to you as often as possible. Now let's get on to the episode.
Hey everybody, Larry Bale here, Mortgage Workflow Partners. It's time to talk about more Encompass information. Today is Thursday, October 26th at 1 p.m. Eastern. Thanks for coming. We meet every Tuesday and Thursday. So thanks everybody for coming to today's discussion is the best practices of user groups in Encompass. Woohoo! It is user groups are probably underutilized. I actually working with a pretty large lender who is trying to figure out how to allow, try to come up with a method to allow for their third-party processors to be able to not have to have a bajillion different email addresses for the brokers that they work with in TPO. So if you are doing TPO business, hi Angie, if you are doing TPO business and you are struggling with the concept of helping your brokers use third-party processing companies, and you're using Encompass, and the third-party processing companies having a really hard time because they're maintaining multiple email addresses for the multiple companies they're supporting, I can help you. I figured out a way through it. So I'm really excited about that. We're going to talk about how to use user groups in maybe ways that you're not thinking about. We're going to go through the setting. And most importantly, we're going to take questions. So Angie, you had said they're confusing at times. I'm guessing you're talking about user groups because that's what we're talking about. Any particular questions? Like, I'm really curious, first of all, for those that are on the call, thank you very much. If you go into your user groups, show of hands through the chat, I guess, do you have less than 10 user groups or more? And I would probably guess that everybody's going to say more. So Robert's at more, and several people are typing as they're going more. Jolene says less. Which is always interesting, right? You're like, well, how come Jolene can say yes? Brian says 10 exactly. Who could have thought that? And so maybe you're saying you're ready to clean out. So I'd love to talk to you more about that. If you've got a mic and you are willing to join us up on stage, I'm inviting you in as a speaker. And the reason why I was going to ask you, 22 is such a great number, Tim. The reason why I'm going to ask you about that is because when you say you're ready to clean out, remove a few, I want to talk to you about that and ask you, how are you planning on doing this and why you're planning on doing this?
Hello.
Hi. Thanks for jumping on.
No, we have some user groups that were created so that loan officers could work as teams or share things, and those loan officers don't work for the organization anymore. And I just, every time we open user groups, I'm like, why do I have a user group that's team? None of these people work here. Yeah. So I feel like that's just taking up extra space. So when I say I'm wanting to work on a project to clean them up and remove a few, that's what I mean.
Yeah. And that's what I was hoping that's what you were going to say. And for those that had that, I know I've had that situation. Looks like Kevin says he set some up for vacation coverage for loan officers. I think everybody's probably had to do that sooner or later. But so maybe your case is loan officers are no longer there. I'm just curious. Do you move if somebody leaves, right? If somebody's no longer active in your company, do you put them into? Do you remove them from all the user groups?
Well, now that's an interesting question because technically, yes, But if a loan officer leaves and then loan officer A and B are like, oh, we need to see that loan officer's files, the easiest way to do that is to put that loan off, the loan officer who's not there, view only for their files, so that, you can have a context when somebody calls and says, oh, I purchased my house from the loan officer who doesn't work here anymore, but can you help me refinance it? They want to be able to go in and see that person's original file. But, I figure after a certain amount of time, like if these people have not worked, if I don't recognize their names, it's probably time to let it go.
Yeah. And so, first of all, I appreciate that insight. I'm sure everybody else does. But, far too many times. So when I go through admin training, we come to user groups and I talk a lot about the tabs and I talk a lot about resource allocations, things like that. But I thought today would be a really good conversation, get into the mechanics of what we have to do throughout our days. And it involves access to loans, obviously, and it also involves things like templates, custom print forms, and then the role list view, which I still think most folks don't really have a good handle around. For anybody watching this on a replay, please get over to mortgage.community to watch the full thing. If you're listening on podcast, that's awesome, but I'm going to be sharing screen like I'm doing right now. And so if you can't see the screen, you probably can't enjoy the whole conversation. So the biggest question that I always ask when I go through an Encompass in dealing with best practice isn't necessarily the number of user groups. So Maya, and it's pronounced Maya, right?
Yeah.
Oh, cool. So the question I have for you then is, because you're going through cleanup, are you maintaining a separate table somewhere of which users are in which user group, or are you just kind of committing this to memory and doing additional research every time you have to go address it?
Active users, I have a listing, but in this case, like I really am just talking about, like, we have a user group that's called Team Loan Officer, and there is one current loan officer in it. And I feel like this user group was probably created so that this one loan officer could see the loan files of 3 other loan officers who don't work here anymore and haven't in a long time. So when I remove a user as an admin, I take them out of the user group. But since I didn't remove these users, they've been out of the organization since longer than I've been the working admin.
Mm-hmm.
So I would just, remove them from the user group because they're going to be in my archived users and they just don't exist in our system anymore. Does that make sense?
So you're going over into organization users, you're creating like a disabled users folder and you're putting those folks in there? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And this is a fairly common thing when you're trying to keep your Encompass organized in perpetuity. What'll happen is folks will say, okay, well, this user, we even have users in these now, but we move a user who was in branch A and they're no longer working for the company. So we put them down disabled. And then immediately anybody in operations can't see that those loans that were started anymore unless their name is in the file, because that's just a native way the organizational hierarchy works. So yeah, so one of the first best practices I talk about is making sure that you're not using the organizational hierarchy to display loan files. Like this right here, as we see on screen, anybody in branch B will automatically see everything in branch B1, whereas branch A won't see anything in branch B, naturally or processing. And these are file created. Like, so for everybody who's kind of wondering, this is all about who starts the file. And so what happens in Encompass is if a loan gets started by somebody in branch B1, and that person now runs their own branch, and when we create another organization for, let's just say we move them into processing, everybody in branch B will no longer be able to see any loan created in branch B1 because of the organizational hierarchy, unless they have a user group. So, if I go into an Encompass environment, if you go into your Encompass environment, gang, and you're not using a vertical tree, so to speak, for your organizational hierarchy, if you're getting into nesting things like this, and you're using this to guide your loan level access to those other team members, you need to stop. And you need to start using user groups, as it sounds like May is using, and I know other folks that I've worked with understand this concept of user groups pretty well. And so does anybody have any if you have any questions about this, like if you look at your own organizational hierarchy here, the question that you would have is, if we move the user from branch B1 into branch A, but there's still people who need to see the loan in branch B, those are the loans that were created by that user before they moved. If they're all of a sudden not able to see it, well, that's because you don't have your user group set up properly. Because typically in your user groups, you would want to come into that branch B as an example. And so we'll just call this branch B for illustration for the conversation. And you'd want to go into branch B, and the members of branch B would be the branch B members, presumably. So we get into here, and we want to add to this group, right? Those are the only members of that. Now, the loans that they see, you'd come in and you'd say, okay, well, if I wanted to see everything in branch B1, I would just add this to the group. The challenge is that if you do it this way, you'll be fine until somebody no longer belongs to branch B.1. And so that's what Mayo was saying. You go in and you'd say, oh, listen, I want to see also this Larry Test account. So no matter where Larry Test goes in the organization, no matter where Larry goes, everybody in the members tab will be able to see the loans created by Larry Test. So anybody have any questions about that, or want to talk about it, or disagree with me, or anything along those lines? Please, bring it up here in the chat, or if you want to come up on to talk about it directly, or if you want to share your own user groups, it's up to you on how you want to deal with it. So the first best practice I want to share with you is absolutely do not rely upon this to serve loans, even if it's just natively able to see subordinate loans. You want to make sure that you create user groups that define loan access in a manner that's consistent with your intention. So that involves loan folders, as well as loan files. That's my first best practice. My next best practice is a little bit more global. So my next best practice on here is the all users user group. So again, for those that are, hopefully you're following along with your own Encompass, do me a favor and check to see in your loans tab, borrower contact, and I'll go start with loans first. So to Brian's kind of beating me to the point here, but your all users is everyone. And even if you're only 5 people strong or 10 people strong as an organization, you still never want to have, my opinion, you never want to have any resource at all, ever, in the all users user group. That includes folders. So I would always deselect all folders, and I'd make sure that this is wiped out. And the reason why is because this is everyone. And I don't care how small you are, typically everyone doesn't need everything all the time. And unfortunately, you can't get rid of the all users user group. The intention is very, very old, and it's pervasive in our current settings. And what ends up happening is somebody has access to something that they shouldn't, or they don't need access to. First thing is loans. The next thing in borrower contacts that people tend to forget about is down here. So if you have this check, that means all your loan officers can see all your other loan officers' borrower contacts. And if that's okay, and they can edit them too, by the way. If that's okay, all right. But it's probably not. It's probably not a best practice. So best practice is always make sure that's unchecked at the bottom. And so everybody can't see everybody else's borrower contacts, presuming you give them access to borrower contacts. I'm curious, is anybody's in the all user group? Did anybody have that checked if you're willing to admit it? I'm curious to see. We do. Yeah. So Angie, so here's what happens, just so you understand. Appreciate it, Brian. So here's what happens, just so you know. And again, it might not be a big deal, right? But so it sounds like Robert already learned this lesson. So if you go as a loan officer, I can go to borrower contacts and I can see every borrower contact. Now, you might be thinking, what's the big deal, Larry? The big deal is that you just don't do it. You don't give a salesperson A access to salesperson's B's loans. The reason why is because A, it's a sense of ownership to the salesperson. It's their client. But B, you also have risk here, gang. I want to talk about reality. If some person who has access to this and they can go here and they can select them all and hit the export, bye, your borrower list. Bye. It's the reason why I always advocate for disabling Excel export from the pipeline view. So that's the big deal here, gang. The big deal isn't necessarily the user group, blah, blah, blah. The big deal is the implication of what's possible. And so if somebody leaves your company, a big salesperson, all of a sudden now all those borrowers are getting, your entire organization's borrowers are getting solicited from this person who left. Well, how the hell did they do that? You could have had a gap in this. Yeah. Definitely disable the Excel report. So what happens if these contacts are deleted, Angie? That's a really good question. I think they're gone forever. I don't know. Let's try them. Let's see what happens. Are you sure you want to delete Test Susan? Yeah, pretty much gone. How do you disable? It doesn't affect the loan in any way, Angie, but it does affect the synchronization of the loan. So if you delete borrower contacts that are synced to the loan, you could have an issue where a user goes in the file to do something, and now the synchronization is broken. And Encompass could ask them to recreate a borrower that doesn't exist already. It'll be like an awkward exchange. Chris says, how do you disable the Excel report? Come on, Chris. You go to pipeline. I don't know why I said pipeline. Go to the persona. And then in the persona, you want to go over into, this comes up. I'll just go into the first one, loan officer, go to contacts, and then over here, Excel. Why am I not seeing Excel? Export contacts, that's that part. That's a really good question. Where is the Excel? Good question, Chris. Thank you for asking that question. I'm going to go with that it's not there. He didn't stump me. It's just not there. So I would go with the export contact should be unchecked. The print should always be unchecked. Yeah, that's what I think too, Angela. So I'm going to go with that. Like, you should never allow anybody to export anything. Yeah, I think it's export, Robert. I think you're right. It makes sense to me. Like, I know it doesn't logically make sense that that's the export, but it says export to Excel. I'm going to go with that, Chris. I'm going to ask you to test it, and you come back on Tuesday and let us know. Or post in the community and say, hey, that question that Larry didn't have a good answer for, here's the right answer. That's always good. And guys, listen, this is the thing. You have to go through these settings because if you don't do it every day, you forget. So thanks for asking the question, Rob. Seriously. Or Chris, excuse me. I'm looking at Rob Loudon. I can't imagine persona stuff without senior management approval. Might be a while. Tell them that you believe that there's an ability for them to lose their entire pipeline to a disgruntled salesperson, and see how long it takes them to make that decision. Just food for thought. Let's see, just to miss the chat here, what happens? Oh, contacts. Sharon says, my members are administration and we have to, yeah. I don't know why either, Sharon. We never did get to your settings, did we, Sharon? Anyway, back to user groups here. So borrower contacts. The next thing is loan templates. And I talk about this a lot in setup. Keep in mind that if you have every template available in the all user section, that means you can never take it away. And again, your company may not be one that you care about this much, but if you've got specific branch closing costs set up, or if you've got specific loan programs set up that are only supposed to be rolled out to specific places, if you use the company-wide, that's okay, because you do have a line above company-wide, which is public. But if you went public and down, that's problematic because now there's no place to hide. So what I usually say in the all user group is make sure that the loan templates tab is cleaned up. And I want you to think about the off chance that you might need to not allow every template available to everything. Kevin's going back to the export templates. Yeah. So Kevin makes 2 points, 2 places, export contacts on trades, also pipeline. Yeah, so the Excel thing on the pipeline, that's in the pipeline tab in the persona. But we think the export contacts is the Excel function, but Chris Lawrence is going to verify it for us for the community. I've thrown the gauntlet down on Chris to do that, so hopefully he does that for us. But yeah, watch this, because I've seen situations, and again, what we're talking about is in a loan file. Can they go and select it? This does not affect loan template sets. So you can define a loan template set here and leave the rest of these blank. These are if the user can go into the loan file, click the loan, and then apply or append the proper template. So that's what these control. You already have it disabled. Well, then you should log in as your test loan officer and see if you can see the Excel button, Chris. See what happens. Next one is resources, and this one's a real pain in the ass, truthfully. So first of all, see, again, going back to the borrower contacts checkbox, go into your standard print forms and tell me if you still have like all the 2010 HUD ones, and if you have the 1003 over here, the 1003 letter size, and if you've got the 2010 the 2010 HUD 1 filled in there. What I'm really looking for, the standard forms, these are more annoying than anything else, but where the risk is in the custom print forms. If you've got custom print forms set for company-wide, and if you've got like what I have here on screen, if you've got things like conditional approval letters on here, that means everybody can print them. Now, if you have loan form printing rules, maybe you've kind of short-circuited that access, which is totally admirable, but most don't. And so really, please be careful about your custom print forms and your standard print forms in particular. Yeah, I think we all do, Rob. And again, it's a pain in the ass, the print forms. I'm kind of like, I don't really care about the standard. It's the custom one that I worry about the most. The other thing that's important is making sure your public business contact groups are set appropriately here. Again, if you go in if you're using public business contacts to serve up things like approved appraisers or whatever, you want to make sure you're identifying that at the correct user group. I've seen a lot of companies have problems where the business didn't realize somebody had access to a particular business contact, and they didn't understand it because they didn't review their all users user group. Same thing goes down here for like these campaigns, dashboards, reports. Be mindful about what you're serving up to all users. Again, if you create a report, if you have at the persona level, if you have the not accessible column set up properly, and you build a sensitive report and you put it into company-wide, you might be okay. Remember, when you have in the persona, if you have the not accessible column field entered onto that spot, even if the field exists in the report, it won't appear. Encompass does cover your ass on that. Campaign templates, Angie, this is back from the day when Encompass thought it was going to be a CRM. So the campaign templates are over in the close, will you? Close. Over in here. So contacts tab, campaigns. You probably never seen this, but you can actually create a campaign. Companies that use this, which are like Xero, use it mostly for mail merge, that kind of a thing. But I haven't seen a company use this in like forever. So no. Angie asked, can you use this instead of an eCRM? Oh, the Encompass CRM? No. It's not a CRM. No. This thing's built in 2005. Like, yeah. I would certainly encourage you, right? I don't want to dissuade you from looking at it. I would encourage you to look at it, and you can see where it falls down. It is not by any stretch of the imagination a CRM whatsoever. The last one is role list view. So in the all users user group, I always recommend you go through every single role, set it to some, make sure you don't include, and then hit save, and then go to the next one, hit some, hit save. And the reason why I say this is because, again, I plan for scale. I don't want everybody always seeing every person in the role, regardless of where they are. So a good example is if you've got branches that are, if you've got sales organizations that are only seeing certain processors, you only want to see that. And so I like to use the queue method. That's QUEUE. So if I've got like processing queue or an underwriting queue or post-closing queue, et cetera, I don't want them to see actual people. I want them to see the queue user. So I'll do this in here, and then in the user group, I'll flip it around to where they can see some. And then I'll put in here, because it'll usually be a disabled user. I'll usually uncheck that, and then I don't have a queue user created, but I'll usually add in, pretend that says queue. It'll say, processing queue, and that's the user, and they are disabled. So you can't, that way it doesn't affect my user count, but that way I can go through and add them into the loan file as a queue. They're disabled, so it doesn't affect the money I pay to ICE. And it allows me to make sure that's the only user everybody sees, other than the processing team. And the processing team would see all processors, and I would flip it back to that. Does that make sense? Is anybody doing that, by the way, the queue method? It's QUEUE. And is anybody have a different methodology, really, to using the user group for the role list view? Sorry for my voice. I was at Depeche Mode last night at the Wells Fargo Center. Really good show. Don't believe the crap on social media that it sounds horrible. It was a fantastic show. If you're into Depeche Mode. So. You have adverse action queue. Yeah. Right. So Angie, in your workflow, somebody wants to adverse it. I guess you have a role that says adverse action, and then you assign it to a queue, and then you've got a team that handles the adverse actions. Angie, I guess. Hey, if you ever want to automate it, you know a guy who can help you automate that in case the business wants to automate the adverse actions. Just saying. So besides that, gang, user groups, really the biggest summary here is make sure you are not using your organizational hierarchy to define your loan level access. Maya defined a beautiful example. Thanks, Maya, for coming up on stage and willing to share your experiences live. We always appreciate that. And I did say Depeche Mode, Kayla. Yeah, they were at Wells Fargo last night. Good show. I'll post videos. I'm going to do what I did with the cure. I'm going to do it in the community for the takeaway. Yeah, it was a really good show. Angie says, could you show that access checkbox again? I don't see that access checkbox. You mean borrower contacts? This thing? It's under borrower contacts at the very bottom. You have to see it. Maybe you didn't click on the right tab, but it's definitely in borrower contacts, access to this group's borrower contacts. And remember, the relativity here is this group is all users. So, it should say access to this members, to the group members borrower contacts, but this syntax here is not the best. Any other questions, concerns, thoughts around user groups? Tuesday's topic is all about loan processing. I'm definitely going to blow your mind with something. I came up with a workflow with processors. All processors live off a checklist. I'm going to show you something really, really cool that's currently available that will just be awesome. I think everybody's going to want to do it, but that's just me. In the meantime, hope you guys have a great weekend. I hope your months are rounding out really well. And as always, if you ever have any questions, please either reach out directly or post the stuff in the community. Really appreciate you all, keeping the conversations going and asking what can be done to help you out. Terrific. You got it, Chris. Don't forget to let us know about the Excel thing, and we're counting on you, Chris. Don't let us down. Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend. See you now. Bye-bye. Chris says, wait, Chris is rounding out. Chris says, a lot of pressure. Yeah, man. You can do it. You can handle it, Chris. You have one persona per user account, which is the hardest thing to do in all of Encompass land. So if you can do that, you can do this. All right, Chris, have a great weekend. See you, everybody. Bye-bye.